The cargo freighter Meridian's Hope fell from the sky like a wounded bird, its engines screaming as flames poured from the starboard side, and the hull shook with violent tremors that threw everyone inside against the walls and ceiling. Marcus Cole grabbed the safety rail and held on as the ship twisted and dropped through the atmosphere of Varath 7, a forest moon that appeared on every navigation chart with a simple warning: Class 4 Predator World, do not land. But they had no choice now. The pilot, a young man named Torres, fought with the controls as sweat poured down his face and his hands moved desperately across the console, trying to find some way to slow their descent, some miracle that would save them from the green and brown surface rushing up to meet them. "Brace for impact," Torres shouted, and those were the last words he ever spoke. The ship hit the forest canopy with a sound like thunder, tearing through massive trees that had stood for 1,000 years, ripping metal as scattering debris across a kilometer of alien wilderness before finally coming to rest in a crater of broken earth and shattered timber. Marcus opened his eyes to darkness and the smell of smoke and burning fuel. His head throbbed where it had struck something hard, and warm blood trickled down the side of his face. But he was alive, and that meant he had work to do. He pulled himself up from the floor and looked around the cargo hold where he had been when the crash began. Emergency lights flickered red and orange, casting strange shadows across the scattered crates and containers that had broken free from their restraints. And there in the corner, he heard the sound that would change everything: the crying of children. Marcus moved through the wreckage, climbing over broken metal and pushing aside debris until he found them. The Veloxi mother lay against the wall, her soft gray fur matted with blue blood. Large, dark eyes filled with pain and fear as she tried to shield her 6 cubs with her broken body. The Veloxi were a prey species. Everyone in the galaxy knew that. They looked something like the rabbits of Earth, standing upright on 2 legs, with long ears and gentle faces, but they had no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons of any kind. Evolution had given them only speed and numbers and the instinct to run. And right now this mother could do none of those things. "Help us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the groaning of the damaged ship. "Please help my children." Marcus knelt beside her and quickly assessed her injuries. 3 broken ribs at least, probably internal bleeding, and her left leg was bent at an angle that made his stomach turn. She would not be walking anywhere, maybe not ever again. "I need to move you," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady, even though his own heart was pounding. "This ship could catch fire at any moment, and we need to get outside." The cubs clustered around their mother, 6 small faces looking up at Marcus with huge, terrified eyes. The oldest could not have been more than 8 years old, by human standards, and the youngest was barely more than a toddler, clutching a small stuffed toy that had somehow survived the crash. Marcus worked quickly, finding a flat piece of hull plating that could serve as a stretcher, and carefully lifting the injured mother onto it with help from the older cubs, who pushed through their fear to assist. "What is your name?" he asked, as he began to drag the makeshift stretcher toward the breach in the hull, where pale light filtered through. "I am Vessel Mother Scylla," she replied, her voice tight with pain. "These are my children, and we were traveling to the colony on Varath 3 to start a new life." "Well, Scylla, we are going to get you and your children out of here," Marcus said. "My name is Marcus Cole, and I used to be a Marine before I became a cargo hauler, so I know a thing or two about survival." He did not mention that he had left the Marines after failing to protect his own family. He did not mention the nightmares that still woke him in the dark hours of the night. Some things were better left unspoken. They emerged from the wreckage into a world of towering trees and thick undergrowth, where strange sounds echoed from every direction, and the air smelled of moss and decay and something else, something that made the fur on Scylla's cubs stand on end. "Where are we?" the oldest cub asked, a young male named Tyrion, whose voice trembled but who stood straighter than his siblings. Verath 7, Marcus replied, scanning the tree line with eyes that had seen too many battlefields. A forest moon in the outer systems. Scylla made a sound of pure despair. This is a death world, she whispered. The Kythrani hunt here, packs of them, hundreds of them. And they have never let prey escape their forests. Marcus looked at her, then at the 6 small faces watching him with desperate hope. How long until someone comes looking for us? Tyrion asked. The emergency beacon is damaged, but I might be able to fix it, Marcus said. If I can get it working, rescue ships could be here in 2 or 3 days. 2 or 3 days, Scylla repeated, and tears began to fall from her dark eyes. We will not survive 2 or 3 hours once the sun sets, and the Kythrani will smell our blood and hear our fear, and come for us like they have come for every other creature that has ever crashed on this moon. Marcus helped her into a sheltered spot beneath the curved hull of the wrecked ship, where the metal would provide some protection from the elements and from watching eyes. The cubs gathered around their mother, pressing close to her warmth and comfort. I need to check on the pilot, Marcus said, though he already knew what he would find. He returned to the cockpit and confirmed what he had suspected. Torres was dead, his neck broken on impact, his young face frozen in an expression of determination, as he had fought to save them until the very end. Marcus closed the young man's eyes and said a quiet word of respect before returning to the survivors. The sun was already beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. We have maybe 2 hours of daylight left, he announced. I am going to gather supplies and build a fire and set up some kind of defense around this position. Defense? Scylla laughed. But there was no humor in the sound, only bitter acceptance. There is no defense against the Kythrani, human, and they are pack hunters who have evolved for millions of years to be perfect killers. Marcus looked at her with steady eyes. Then they have never met a human who has something to protect, he said simply, and began to work. As the sun continued its descent and shadows grew long across the forest floor, Marcus gathered everything useful from the wreckage: emergency flares, lengths of metal pipe, fuel canisters, wire, and a pneumatic mail driver that maintenance crews used for repairs. He built a ring of fire around their shelter, feeding it with broken wood and debris. He sharpened a cargo hook into a vicious blade. He rigged trip lines with empty cans that would rattle if anything passed through. And all the while, the cubs watched him with growing wonder, because they had never seen anyone prepare to fight instead of flee. Night fell like a curtain dropping on a stage, sudden and complete. The fire crackled and popped, casting a circle of light, perhaps 20 meters wide. Beyond that circle, darkness pressed in from every direction. And then the howling began. It started from one direction, a long, mournful sound that rose and fell like a wave. And then it was answered from another direction, and another, until the entire forest seemed to be singing a song of hunger and death. Scylla pulled her cubs close and closed her eyes, but Marcus stood at the edge of the firelight, his makeshift weapon in his hand, and he watched the darkness with the patience of a man who had faced death before. Eyes began to appear in the shadows, dozens of them, glowing with a pale blue bioluminescence that painted the forest in ghostly light. The Kythrani had found them, and they were hungry. The Kythrani moved through the darkness like ghosts, their 6 legs carrying them in perfect silence over the forest floor, as their glowing eyes tracked every movement within the circle of firelight. Marcus counted them as they emerged from the shadows. 10, then 20, then 30, and still more kept coming from every direction, until the darkness itself seemed alive with watching predators. They were magnificent in their terrible way, these hunters of Verath 7. Each one stood as tall as a large wolf at the shoulder, but their bodies were longer and more serpentine, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb the light around them. Their heads were broad and flat, with rows of teeth that gleamed like wet knives when they opened their mouths to taste the air. And those eyes, those pale blue glowing eyes, held an intelligence that made Marcus's skin crawl. This was not a pack of simple animals. These were thinking creatures, him the same way he was studying them. One Kithrani stepped forward from the others, larger than the rest, with old scars crossing her face, and a torn left ear that spoke of countless battles survived. The alpha female, Marcus realized, the leader of this pack, and probably the most dangerous thing on this entire moon. She did not attack. Instead, she sat down at the very edge of the firelight and simply watched, her tail curling around her legs with an almost casual grace. Behind Marcus, the cubs whimpered and pressed closer to their mother. "Why is she waiting?" Tyrion whispered, his young voice tight with terror. "She is testing us," Marcus replied, without taking his eyes off the alpha. "Predators like this do not waste energy on fights they do not need to win. And she is trying to figure out what we are and how much of a threat we pose." "We pose no threat," Scylla said weakly from her stretcher, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "We are Veloxi, and we are prey, and she knows this." "Maybe you are," Marcus said, "but I am human, and she has never hunted my kind before." The alpha tilted her head at the sound of his voice, ears rotating forward to catch every word. Marcus wondered if she understood language or if she simply recognized the tone of defiance in his speech. Either way, she seemed intrigued rather than intimidated. As the night crawled forward, the Kithrani began their testing. First, a young male darted toward the fire from the left, moving so fast he was almost a blur of dark fur and glowing eyes. Marcus swung his sharpened cargo hook and felt it connect with something solid, before the creature yelped and retreated, leaving a trail of dark blood on the ground. Then two more came from the right, coordinating their attack to split his attention. Marcus grabbed a burning branch from the fire and thrust it toward the first, while slashing at the second with his blade. One of them caught fire along its flank and fled screaming into the forest, while the other took a deep gash across its snout. The cubs watched with wide eyes, unable to believe what they were seeing. All their lives they had been taught that when predators came, you ran. When predators came, you hid. When predators came, you accepted that some would be taken, so that others might survive. But this human, this strange flat-faced creature with no fur and no claws and no fangs, was fighting back. He was hurting them. The attacks continued through the night in waves, each one probing a different angle, testing a different defense. Marcus took wounds of his own, a claw rake across his left arm that bled freely through his torn sleeve, a bite to his calf that made him limp, a gash on his forehead that sent blood dripping into his eyes. But he did not fall. He did not retreat. He stood his ground and made every Kithrani who came close pay for the attempt in pain and blood. When the sky finally began to lighten toward dawn, the alpha rose from her watching position and let out a long, complex howl that echoed through the trees. The pack retreated into the forest, melting back into the shadows as silently as they had emerged. Marcus stood swaying in the morning light, his body covered in wounds and his clothes soaked with blood, both red and dark, his chest heaving with exhaustion. But he was still standing. Scylla stared at him with something like awe in her pain-filled eyes. "You survived," she whispered. "I have never seen anyone survive a night against the Kithrani." "Surviving one night means nothing," Marcus replied as he began to bind his wounds with strips torn from his shirt. "They were testing me, learning my patterns and my weaknesses, and tonight they will come back with a real attack." Disappeared and felt a chill run down his spine. She had watched him all night, that scarred old hunter. She had watched him fight her pack, watched him bleed, watched him refuse to fall. And in her intelligent eyes, he had seen something that worried him deeply. She was not afraid. She was curious. "We have until sunset to prepare," Marcus told the cubs, who were huddled around their mother like frightened chicks beneath a hen. "I need all of you to help me." "Us?" Tyrion asked, his ears flattening against his skull. "What can we do against monsters like that?" Marcus knelt down to look the young Veloxi in the eyes. "You can be brave," he said simply. "You can hold a torch when I need light, and you can watch directions I cannot watch, and you can help me build barriers and set traps." "But we are prey," Tyrion said, repeating the words that had been spoken to him since birth. "We do not fight." "Who told you that?" "Everyone," the boy replied. "Our teachers and our parents and our whole world, because that is what Veloxi are." Marcus shook his head slowly. "Let me tell you something about humans," he said. "A long time ago, on a planet called Earth, we were prey too, and we were small and weak, and we had no claws and no fangs and no armor, and there were predators everywhere who wanted to eat us." The cubs leaned forward slightly, drawn in despite their fear. "So what did you do?" the smallest cub, a female named Miri, asked in a tiny voice. "We decided to stop being prey," Marcus said. "We picked up rocks and sticks, and we learned to work together, and we made the predators afraid of us instead. And it took a long time and many of us died, but in the end we became the most dangerous thing on our planet." "But that is impossible," Tyrion protested. "Prey cannot become predators." "Prey can become protectors," Marcus corrected him. "Is even more dangerous." He stood up and looked around at the wreckage and the forest and the rising sun that marked the beginning of what might be their last day alive. "The Kithrani are smart," he continued. "They know I hurt them badly last night, and they know I will do it again tonight, so they are going to call for more packs." Scylla made a sound of despair. "More packs means hundreds of them," she said. "No creature can fight hundreds." "I do not need to kill hundreds," Marcus said. "I just need to make it too expensive for them to kill us, and predators understand cost and benefit better than anyone." He began to work, and slowly, hesitantly, the cubs began to help him. They gathered branches for the fire. They carried stones to build barriers. They watched the tree line while he rigged traps from fuel lines and collapsed support beams. And as the day wore on, and the sun climbed high, and then began its descent toward the end horizon, something changed in the young Veloxi. They stopped trembling quite so much. They stopped flinching at every sound. They began to move with purpose instead of fear, because they had a task to do, and someone who believed they could do it. Tyrion stood a little taller. Miri stopped crying, and even Scylla, weak and broken as she was, began to watch Marcus with something other than despair in her eyes. The afternoon light grew golden and long, and shadows began to stretch across the forest floor. Marcus finished his preparations and took a moment to check his weapons. The sharpened cargo hook, the pneumatic nail driver with only 12 shots remaining, 3 torches, and a length of pipe wrapped with wire for better grip. It was not much. It would have to be enough. From somewhere deep in the forest, a howl rose into the air. It was answered by another, and another, and another. Marcus looked at Tyrion, held out a torch. "Remember what I taught you," he said. "Stay behind me, keep the flame high, and do not run no matter what happens." The boy took the torch with shaking hands, but his jaw was set, and his eyes were determined. "I will not run," Tyrion promised. The sun touched the horizon and began to sink below it. The howling grew louder, closer, more numerous than anything Marcus had heard the night before. And in the gathering darkness, hundreds of pale blue eyes began to appear among the trees. Marcus stood at the edge of the firelight and counted the glowing eyes that surrounded them, giving up when he passed 200 and realized more were still arriving from every direction. The alpha female was there, sitting in her same spot from the night before, but now she was flanked by other large Kythrani, who carried themselves with the same confident authority. Pack leaders, Marcus realized. She had called in every pack from miles around, combining them into a force that could overwhelm any defense he might build. "There are so many," Tyrion whispered from behind him, the torch trembling in his small hands. "Yes, there are," Marcus agreed, seeing no point in lying to the boy. "Can you fight them all?" Marcus turned to look at the young Veloxi, at his frightened face, and his determined eyes, and the way he stood his ground, despite every instinct screaming at him to run. "I can try," Marcus said, "and trying is all any of us can do." The memory came to him unbidden, as it always did in moments like this. His daughter Sarah had been 7 years old when the pirates hit their colony ship. 7 years old, with bright eyes and a laugh that could fill any room with joy. Marcus had been in the cargo bay when the attack began, too far away to reach her in time. He had fought his way through corridors filled with smoke and screaming, had killed 3 pirates with his bare hands, had been shot twice and kept moving. But when he reached their quarters, she was already gone. Taken or killed, he never learned which. The pirates fled before he could find her, and all the searching and all the years since had never revealed her fate. That failure had broken something inside him. That failure had driven him from the Marines and into the lonely life of a cargo hauler who spoke to no one and cared for nothing. But now, looking at these 6 small cubs who needed him, Marcus felt something stir in his chest that he had thought was dead forever. He would not fail again. He could not fail again. "I need to work on the beacon," he told Terran. "Can you watch the fire and tell me if they start moving?" The boy nodded, his ears standing straight up with tension. Marcus moved to the damaged emergency beacon he had pulled from the wreckage earlier that day and began to examine its components by the flickering light. The power cell was intact. That was good. The antenna array was bent, but could be straightened. The main transmitter board had a crack running through it, but if he could bridge the gap with a piece of conductive wire, it might still function. He worked with hands that remained steady, despite the wounds and exhaustion, pulling components apart and putting them back together while the night pressed in around them. Scylla watched him from her stretcher, her blue blood still seeping slowly through the bandages he had made for her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice weak but curious. Marcus did not look up from his work. "Because you need help," he said simply. "But we are strangers to you, and we are not even your species, and you are going to die here trying to protect creatures you have never met before." Marcus paused then, his hands going still on the beacon. "I had a daughter once," he said quietly, the words coming out before he could stop them. "She was small and helpless, and she depended on me to keep her safe, and I failed her." Scylla was silent, waiting. "Every day since then, I have carried that failure with me like a stone around my neck," Marcus continued. "I have run from it and hidden from it and tried to drink it away and work it away and sleep it away, but nothing makes it lighter." He looked up at the cubs, at their innocent faces and their trembling bodies, and their absolute trust that he would protect them. "When I saw your children in that wreckage, something woke up inside me that I thought was dead," he said. "Something that told me I had a chance to do it right this time, to be the protector I should have been all those years ago." "But you might die," Scylla said. "I might," Marcus agreed. "But if I run away and leave you here, then I will have failed again, and I would rather die fighting than live with that." The smallest cub, Miri, had crept closer while he was talking, and now stood beside him, looking up with huge dark eyes. "Are you scared?" she asked in her tiny voice. "Yes, little one," he admitted, "I am very scared." "But you are still going to fight?" "Yes." "Why?" Marcus reached out and gently touched the soft fur on top of her head. "Because being brave does not mean not being scared," he said. "Being brave means being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway. Miri considered this for a moment, then nodded solemnly and returned to her siblings. Marcus went back to work on the beacon. The night crawled past as the Kithrani continued to gather, their numbers swelling until the forest beyond the firelight seemed to be nothing but glowing eyes and shadowy bodies. The alpha female rose and began to pace along the perimeter, her scarred face illuminated by the flames as she studied the defenses Marcus had built. She was patient, this old hunter. She had learned through years of experience that the prey which fought hardest was often the prey that was most exhausted, and she was content to let the night and the fear do their work before she committed her forces. But as the hours passed, and Marcus continued to work steadily on the beacon without showing any signs of breaking, something in her demeanor began to change. She had seen many creatures crash on her moon over the years. She had hunted them all. The soft ones who screamed and ran were taken quickly. The fierce ones who fought back lasted longer, but always fell eventually, brought down by numbers and exhaustion and the simple mathematics of predator and prey. But this one was different. This one had already been wounded, had already fought through one night, had already lost enough blood to kill most creatures twice his size, and yet he worked on, calm and steady, as if the hundreds of predators surrounding him were nothing more than an inconvenience. The Alpha did not understand it. Her entire existence was built on understanding prey, on reading their fear and their weakness and their breaking points. But this creature did not seem to have a breaking point. Or if he did, she could not find it. Near midnight, Marcus finished his work on the beacon and pressed the activation switch. A small red light blinked on, then turned green. Faint humming sound filled the air. "Is it working?" Tyrion asked, still holding his torch at the position Marcus had shown him. "It is sending a signal," Marcus confirmed. "If anyone is in range to receive it, they will know we are here." "How long until they come?" Tyrion asked. 2 days, maybe 3. Tyrion looked out at the sea of glowing eyes. "We will not last 2 days," he said, his voice flat with certainty. Marcus stood and stretched his wounded body, feeling the pull of injuries that had not had time to heal. "We only need to last until they decide we are not worth the cost," he said. "What does that mean?" Tyrion asked. "It means that predators are smart," Marcus explained. "They do not fight for honor or revenge or pride, and they fight because they need to eat. And if the cost of eating us becomes too high, they will look for easier prey." "But there is no easier prey," Scylla said from her stretcher. "We are the only food for miles around." Marcus picked up his sharpened cargo hook and tested its edge. "Then I will have to make the cost very high indeed," he said. The Alpha stopped her pacing and sat down, her eyes locked on Marcus with an intensity that made his skin prickle. He met her gaze and did not look away. Something passed between them in that moment. Predator to predator, hunter to hunter. She recognized something in him that her instincts could not quite name, and for the first time in her long and bloody life, she felt a tiny seed of doubt take root in her mind. The eastern sky began to lighten just slightly, the first hint of dawn still hours away. Marcus checked his weapons one more time. The nail driver still had 12 shots. 3 torches remained. The fire burned strong and bright, and 6 small cubs huddled behind him, their lives depending entirely on whether one wounded human could do the impossible. "Get some rest," he said. Told them, "Tonight is going to be hard, and I need you all as strong as possible." The cubs looked at their mother, who nodded weakly. One by one they curled up together in a pile of warm fur and closed their eyes. Only Tyrion remained awake, his torch held high, his young face set with determination. "I will help you watch," he said. Marcus looked at the boy and felt a surge of pride that surprised him. "You are very brave for a prey species," he said. Tyrion almost smiled. Maybe we are learning to be something else, he replied. Outside the firelight, the Kythrani waited, and the night grew darker before the dawn. The Alpha howled at midnight, and the attack began. They came from everywhere at once, a wave of dark fur and glowing eyes and gleaming teeth that crashed against Marcus's defenses like a tide against a rock. The first trap triggered immediately, a fuel line that ignited when a Kythrani broke the tripwire, sending a wall of flame across the northern approach that consumed 3 attackers and sent a dozen more scrambling back with burning fur. Marcus did not waste time watching. He was already moving to the western side, where 5 hunters had found a gap in the barriers, his cargo hooks slashing in wide arcs that opened throats and bellies and sent dark blood spraying across the trampled ground. The pneumatic nail driver barked once, twice, 3 times, each shot driving a steel spike through a Kythrani skull at close range. Behind him, Tyrion held his torch high with both hands, his whole body shaking, but his feet planted firmly on the ground. Ground. Behind you, the boy screamed. Marcus spun and caught a leaping hunter across the face with his blade, feeling the impact jar through his arm as the creature tumbled past him and lay twitching on the ground. The cubs were screaming, huddled around their mother in the center of the defensive circle, while chaos erupted all around them. Scylla tried to rise, tried to pull herself up to protect her children, but her broken body would not obey, and she fell back with a cry of frustration and pain. A Kythrani broke through on the eastern side, its jaws snapping toward the pile of terrified cubs. Marcus threw his torch like a spear, catching the creature in the face with a burst of flame that sent it howling back into the darkness. He grabbed another torch from the pile and returned to the fight. They kept coming. No matter how many he killed or wounded, there were always more, an endless river of predators flowing out of the forest, and throwing themselves at his defenses. Marcus lost track of time. He lost track of the wounds he was taking. A claw raked down his back, opening the skin in 4 parallel lines that burned like fire. Teeth closed on his left forearm, and he had to beat the Kythrani's skull with the butt of his blade until it let go. Something hit him from behind and sent him sprawling, and for one terrible moment he thought it was over. But Tyrion was there, the brave young Veloxi driving his torch into the face of the attacker, buying Marcus the second he needed to regain his feet. "Stay with me," Marcus shouted over the chaos. "I am here," Tyrion shouted back. The nail driver clicked empty. Marcus threw it at an approaching hunter and drew his length of pipe, wielding it alongside his cargo hook in a 2-handed defense that left bodies piling up around him. His vision was narrowing, blood loss and exhaustion taking their toll. His movements were slowing. The Kythrani could sense it. The Alpha watched from her position beyond the firelight, her intelligent eyes tracking every stagger, every missed swing, every moment where Marcus's reactions were just a fraction too slow. She knew he was breaking. She knew it was almost time. But still she waited, because something in the way this creature fought made her cautious. He had killed nearly 30 of her pack already. He was covered in wounds that should have dropped him hours ago. And still he stood. Still he fought. Still he refused to fall. The Alpha had never seen anything like it. In all her years of hunting, she had never encountered prey that simply would not stop. Another wave of attackers, and Marcus went down on one knee, his leg giving out beneath him. A Kythrani leaped for his throat. Marcus caught it on his blade, the momentum driving him onto his back as the dying creature's weight pinned him down, pinned him to the ground. More hunters rushed forward, sensing the kill, and then something unexpected happened. Little Miri, the smallest of the cubs, broke away from her siblings and ran toward Marcus. Her mother screamed, her brothers and sisters screamed, but Miri did not stop. She threw herself onto Marcus's chest and wrapped her small arms around his neck. her body covering his throat, her face pressed against his blood-soaked shirt. "No," she cried, "you cannot have him." The Kithrani that had been rushing forward stumbled to a halt, confused by this tiny prey creature that was not running away, but instead moving toward the danger. Marcus shoved the dead hunter off him and sat up, one arm wrapping around Miri's trembling body as he raised his blade in the other hand. "Get back to your mother," he said, but Miri shook her head and clung tighter. "I am not leaving you," she said. "You did not leave us, and I am not leaving you." Something cracked in Marcus's chest then, something that had been frozen for years. Tears sprang to his eyes, mixing with the blood on his face, and he looked down at this tiny creature who trusted him so completely that she would face death rather than abandon him. "Okay, little one," he whispered, "then we will face them together." He stood up, Miri still clinging to him, and turned to face the remaining attackers. The Alpha rose from her sitting position. This was the moment. The prey was wounded and exhausted and burdened with a helpless child. It was time to end this. She began to walk forward, her pack parting before her like water around a stone. Marcus watched her approach and felt a strange calm settle over him. He was going to die here. He knew that now, but he would take this Alpha with him, and maybe that would be enough to make the pack leave the cubs alone. The Alpha stopped just outside the reach of his blade, her glowing eyes studying him with that unsettling intelligence. And then Marcus did something that surprised even himself. He straightened his spine and squared his shoulders and let out a roar. It was not a word. It was not a battle cry. It was something deeper, something primal, a sound that came from the darkest depths of human history, when his ancestors had faced predators with nothing but rocks and sticks, and the sheer stubborn refusal to die. The sound echoed through the forest, bouncing off the trees and rolling into the distance like thunder. The Alpha's ears flattened against her skull. The Kitharani around her flinched and took involuntary steps backward. Marcus stood there, bleeding from a dozen wounds. A tiny prey creature clutched to his chest, and he roared again. The Alpha stared at him. In her predator's mind, the calculations that had served her species for millions of years were final. Failing. Wounded prey did not stand. Wounded prey did not challenge. Wounded prey did not hold helpless young that were not their own and dare the hunters to come and take them. But this creature did. This creature stood over the small one like it was his own child. This creature fought on past the point of exhaustion and pain and certain death. This creature looked at her with eyes that held no surrender, no acceptance, no prey instinct at all. The Alpha felt something she had never felt before in all her years of hunting. She felt uncertain. She looked at the bodies of her pack, scattered around the defensive circle. She looked at her remaining hunters, wounded and hesitant and waiting for her command. She looked at this strange creature who would not fall, would not break, would not stop. And for the first time in her ancient line's existence, a Kithrani Alpha made a decision that no Kithrani had ever made. Before she turned away, she raised her head and let out a long, complex howl. And her pack began to retreat. One by one, then in groups, then in a flood, the Kithrani melted back into the forest from which they had come. The Alpha paused at the edge of the darkness and looked back one more time at the human who stood bleeding in the firelight, the small prey creature still wrapped around his neck. She did not understand what he was, but she understood that he was not prey, and with that, she vanished into the shadows. Marcus stood swaying for a long moment, unable to believe what had just happened. Then his legs gave out, and he collapsed to his knees. But he did not let go of Miri, and when the other cubs came rushing over to pile around him, when Tyrion dropped his spent torch and wrapped his arms around Marcus's waist, When even broken Scylla dragged herself across the ground to reach them, Marcus held them. All. And finally, after all those years, he allowed himself to weep. Dawn came slowly over Vareth 7, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that filtered through the canopy of ancient trees. Marcus lay where he had fallen, surrounded by a pile of warm bodies, as all 6 cubs pressed against him from every side, sharing their heat with the human who had bled so much to keep them safe. Tyrion had taken up position at the edge of the firelight, still holding a torch, even though the flames had burned down to embers, his young eyes scanning the forest for any sign of the hunters returning. But the Kythrani did not return. The forest was silent, except for the sounds of birds beginning their morning songs, and the world seemed to have forgotten that a battle had raged here only hours before. Scylla watched from her stretcher, as her children slept peacefully for the first time since the crash, their small bodies rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. She could barely see Marcus beneath the pile of cubs, just one bloodied hand visible where it lay protectively over Miri's back. "Thank you," she whispered, though she knew he could not hear her. A sound caught her attention, something distant but growing louder, a rhythmic thumping that she recognized after a moment as the sound of engines. She looked up through a gap in the ruined hull and saw a shape descending through the clouds, a rescue shuttle with its lights flashing and its landing thrusters firing. "They are here," she cried. "Help is here." The cubs stirred and lifted their heads, blinking in the morning light. Marcus groaned and tried to sit up, but his body refused to cooperate, and he fell back with a gasp of pain. "Stay still," Tyrion commanded, his voice surprisingly firm for such a young creature. "You are badly hurt, and the rescuers will help you." The shuttle touched down in a clearing about 50 meters from the crash site, and figures began to emerge almost immediately. Personnel in white uniforms, security officers in armor, pilots and crew members who had responded to the emergency beacon's call. A Veloxi doctor was the first to reach them, her eyes widening at the scene before her. The blood, the bodies of dead Kythrani scattered everywhere. The injured human, barely conscious at the center of a pile of cubs, who refused to move away from him. "What happened here?" she asked in disbelief. "He saved us," Tyrion said simply. "The human saved us." The medical team worked quickly, treating Marcus's wounds with equipment far more advanced than the strips of cloth he had used, injecting him with medicines that would fight infection and promote healing. They tried to move the cubs away so they could work more easily, but Miri and the others clung to Marcus and would not let go. In the end, the doctors had to work around them. Scylla was loaded onto a proper stretcher and carried to the shuttle, treated in a sterile environment with proper tools. As they lifted her, she reached out and grasped the hand of the young human medic who was helping carry her. "Please take care of him," she said. "He is a hero." The medic looked at the scene around her, at the dead predators and the blood-soaked ground, and the human who had somehow stood against an entire pack of apex hunters, and she nodded solemnly. "We will," she promised. Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness as they moved him to the shuttle, aware of gentle hands and soft voices, and the constant presence of small warm bodies pressed against his sides. He dreamed of his daughter Sarah, but for the first time in years, the dream was not a nightmare. In the dream, she smiled at him and told him she was proud, and when he woke up, the tears on his cheeks were not tears of grief, but tears of something that felt almost like peace. 3 days passed in the medical bay of the rescue station. Marcus slept through most of it, his body finally giving in to the rest it so desperately needed, while machines monitored his vital signs and administered healing compounds. When he finally woke, truly woke, he found himself in a clean white bed with soft sheets and a window that looked out onto a field of stars. And there, curled up in a chair beside his bed, was Tyrion. The young Veloxi was asleep. His long ears drooped over his face, and one hand resting on the edge of Marcus's mattress, as if to reassure himself that the human was still there. Marcus watched him for a long moment, feeling emotions he had thought himself incapable of anymore. He reached out and gently touched the boy's hand. Tyrion's eyes flew open instantly, and when he saw that Marcus was awake, his face split into a smile so bright it seemed to light up the whole room. "You are awake," he shouted, loud enough to be heard throughout the medical bay. "Mother, sisters, brothers. The human is awake." Within moments, Marcus was surrounded again, this time by clean and healthy cubs, who chattered excitedly and tried to climb onto his bed, and demanded to know how he was feeling, and whether he was hungry, and did he need anything, and please do not scare them like that ever again. Scylla was brought in on a mobility chair, her leg in a proper cast now, and her injuries healing under proper medical care. She looked at Marcus with eyes full of gratitude, and something deeper, something like love between strangers who had faced death together. "I do not have the words," she said. "In my language or any language, I do not have the words to thank you for what you did." "You do not need to thank me," Marcus replied, his voice rough from disuse. "I only did what anyone would do." Scylla shook her head. "No," she said firmly, "that is where you are wrong, human, because what you did is something almost no one would do, and that is what makes it so remarkable." Months passed. Marcus healed, though he would carry the scars for the rest of his life. The story of what happened on Vareth 7 spread across the Veloxi communication networks, and then beyond, to other species and other worlds, told and retold until it became something like a legend. A human cargo hauler who stood against hundreds of predators to protect 6 children who were not his own. A prey species that learned to stand their ground because one strange creature from a distant planet showed them it was possible. Tyrion told the story to anyone who would listen, and when he grew older, he wrote it down so that future generations would never forget. Invitations came from the Veloxi homeworld, formal and ceremonial, requesting the presence of Marcus Cole for a special honor. He did not want to go. Marcus had never been comfortable with attention or praise, and the idea of standing in front of crowds made him deeply ponder. Uneasy. But Miri asked him to come, with her huge dark eyes and her small voice that could make him do almost anything. And so he went. The ceremony was held in the grand hall of the Veloxi capital, a building that had stood for 1,000 years and hosted the most important moments in their history. Marcus stood uncomfortably in formal clothes that did not fit quite right, while hundreds of Veloxi watched from the surrounding galleries. The High Matriarch herself came forward, an ancient female whose silver furs spoke of decades of wisdom and leadership. "Marcus Cole of Earth," she said in a voice that carried throughout the hall, "we are here to bestow upon you a title that has not been given in living memory." She held up a medallion of carved stone, simple but beautiful, inscribed with symbols in the Veloxi language. "We name you Shelvora," she continued, "which means one who stands between. And this title recognizes those rare individuals who place themselves in the path of danger to protect the helpless." Marcus accepted the medallion with hands that trembled slightly. "I just did what anyone would do," he said, the same words he had said before. The High Matriarch smiled. "And that, Marcus Cole, is precisely what makes your species so terrifying and so wonderful," she replied. "You truly believe that, and you genuinely think that any human would have done the same." She turned to address the gathered crowd. "Let it be known throughout our worlds and beyond," she proclaimed, "that when predators come for the helpless, there are those who will stand in their way, and among the greatest of these are the humans who do not run, who do not surrender, who protect what is not their own as fiercely as what is." The hall erupted in cheers and applause, but Marcus barely heard it. He was looking at Tyrion and Miri and the other cubs in the front row, at their proud faces and their waving hands. And for the first time in many years, he felt like he had a family again. Later that night, as the celebrations wound down and the guests departed, Tyrion found Marcus standing alone on a balcony overlooking the moonlit city. "What are you thinking about?" the young Veloxi asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I am thinking about how strange the universe is," he said finally. "That I lost everything I loved, and yet here I am, surrounded by a new family I never expected to find." Tyrion moved to stand beside him. "Will you stay?" he asked. "On our world, with us?" Marcus looked down at the boy he had stood with him against the hunters, who had held a torch even when his whole body shook with fear, who had refused to run when everything in his nature screamed at him to flee. "Yes," Marcus said, "I think I will." And across the galaxy, among prey species who had always fled, and predator species who had always hunted, a new story began to spread. A story about a human who stood for the cubs. And predators everywhere learned to be afraid.